Fisa documents were released revealing that anti-Trump dossier was a main source in obtaining the warrant, the Fisa warrant, to spy on the Trump campaign leading up to the 2016 election. Well, Tom Fenton, the president of the government watchdog group Judicial Watch, fought for the release of these redacted documents and is now urging the president to declassify them. He's here to explain. Tom, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Okay, I'm doing okay. I'm looking at the documents. There's a lot of Sharpie in here. There's a lot of stuff that's blacked out. We have no idea what's in there. You think the president this morning could call somebody and declassify it, and then we'd know what they're hiding, right?
Well, that's for sure. Devin Nunes, the Bob Good lad, is suggesting that there's other material in there that is classified right now but doesn't need to be classified. And we already see from the material that was released over the weekend that the material that we were told, they couldn't even tell us existed one way or another, didn't need to be classified. And we know why it was classified. It wasn't because they were protecting national security secrets. It was to cover up misconduct by the Justice Department and the FBI in misleading the courts by using this dossier in a dishonest way to gain a warrant to target the Trump team.
Right. And apparently 4 times the FBI told the Fisa court they didn't think that Christopher Steele, the guy behind the dossier, was the guy who leaked the news to Yahoo News that got the ball rolling. And in fact, he did.
You know, Steve, I call it a self-licking ice cream cone, that document. They talk about the dossier generally. Then they talk about news reports about the dossier. Then they talk about a State Department information about Carter Page that had its origins, according to reports in the dossier in the Clinton campaign. This is a Clinton campaign document that was presented to the court as if it weren't, and then they used reports about the Clinton campaign document and leak operation to further justify asking for a warrant to target the Trump team. It's look, anyone who signed on to this needs to be asked questions about why they signed on to it, what they knew and when. And unfortunately includes the current administration official, the number 2 of the Justice Department, Rod Rosenstein.
Sure. What is puzzling to me, though, is the fact that they did not reveal that the DNC and Hillary Clinton were paying for the dossier. Instead, they said, you know, somebody's obviously looking for dirt on Trump. Is that enough?
Oh, you know, I encourage your viewers to go and look at that portion of the dossier. It's a footnote where they describe source number 1, which looked to be the major source. They went out of their way to talk about, to avoid talking about the fact it was the Clinton campaign behind it. There was no good reason not to inform the court that, other than to, again, mislead the court into providing a pretext to spy on the Trump team. And look, this is about Carter Page, in theory. But when you look at what's been released, it was all about getting at the Trump campaign.
Absolutely. And we heard from Carter Page yesterday. He said it's laughable. So
he wasn't a spy. He wasn't an agent of the Russians. He was a cooperator with the FBI. Right. They didn't need to spy on him. It was a fraud and a hoax designed to target Trump, and the DOJ and FBI and the Obama gang behind it need to be held to account.
Well, by spying on him, they got to spy on everybody in the Trump campaign. Tom Fenton, we thank you very much. It was Judicial Watch that, with their Freedom of Information requests, that got this out in front of all of us. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome back. Some quick headlines now. Uber and Lyft passengers in this back seat have live streamed for the world to see without their knowledge. Now, that St. Louis driver, Jason Gargak, has been suspended from Uber and fired from Lyft. According to the St. Louis Dispatch, Gargak posted nearly 700 rides online. And new scanners at airports worldwide could put an end to the liquids ban. The technology can produce a 3D image of material inside bags and detect explosives. Heathrow Airport in London is testing the scanners now. Trials have already been done inside New York City's JFK Airport. Steve.
Thank you, Jillian. We've been telling you about the Department of Justice releasing more than 400 pages of the Fisa warrant application regarding Carter Page. Moments ago, President Trump tweeted this out. So we now find out that it was indeed the unverified and fake dirty dossier that was paid for by crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC. It was knowingly and falsely submitted to Fisa, and which was responsible for starting the totally conflicted and discredited Mueller witch hunt. There's a lot going on in that tweet.
Well, here to weigh in is Dan Bongino, the former Secret Service agent and host of the Dan Bongino Show podcast, and he joins us now with his perspective. Good morning to you, Dan. What do you think about this?
Well, President Trump's right, and he's right to be annoyed, guys. Listen, now we know, now that the FISA warrant application's been released, all 400 pages, and I've gotten through most of it. The case was a hoax. The hoax was paid for by Hillary Clinton. People in the media were integral to the hoax, and the hoax was brought to a court and lied to. Guys, we don't even have to use my words or the words of President Trump to describe the hoax. Let's describe the hoax using the FBI leadership's own words about the hoax. Jim Comey, about the information in the warrant to spy on the Trump team, right? What did he say? It was salacious and unverified. Right. His number two, Andy McCabe, what did he say about it? If we didn't have the fake information, we would have never had a FISA warrant. That's Andy McCabe. The head of the counterintelligence division, when asked if they verified the information in the hoax, what did he say? Oh, it was in its infancy. And finally, this is it. This one is the icing on the cake. Peter Strzok, the lead hoax investigator. What did he say about the hoax? There's no there. You all got worked, America. This is the biggest scam in modern American history.
And one of the things, Dan, that is jaw-dropping is the fact that while it was political opposition research that essentially was the dossier, they never revealed that it was funded by Hillary Clinton and DNC. They just said, yeah, it's the guy behind it is somebody who's looking for dirt on Trump.
Yeah, you think that might be a critical fact? It's like saying, a guy walks out of a facility with money and failing to mention that he robbed a bank. The critical component of information the judge needed to evaluate the content there was that Hillary Clinton's team paid for this information. It was her information. It was her team. Now, yet dancing around that doesn't absolve them of the responsibility to put it in there. And one other critical thing about this, too, because I see the liberals, I already know where they're going with this. They say, well, portions of it are redacted, and they're correct. Heavy portions are redacted. But guys, I've been to court. I've sworn to warrants. There's no extra credit for information in front of a judge. You only put in a warrant what you need to establish probable cause, meaning this. That hoax information in there that we can see was critical towards establishing the legal standard they needed to spy on the Trump team. Meaning without it, they would have never had it. And the FBI's number two, Andy McCabe, attested to that.
Dan, you're the authority on this. What disturbs you the most about this?
That basically Donald Trump was treated like a citizen in a third world communist republic. I mean, Ainsley, listen, justice died a little bit Friday night. And it gives me no joy in telling you, unlike the liberals, I'm not here to own the libs and destroy the constitutional republic. If this was a Democrat, I assure you, I'll go to the grave with this. I would be making the same case to you on national cable television. Donald Trump was treated like a citizen in a socialist republic in Cuba, and the liberals don't give a hoot about it. This is a shame.
Somebody that disagrees with you, Representative Adam Schiff of California, saying the president acts like Russia has dirt on him. Want to play this for you, then get your reaction.
I certainly think he's acting like someone who's compromised, and it may very well be that he is compromised, or it may very well be that he believes that he's compromised, that the Russians have information on him.
What do you make of all that compromise talk by Schiff?
Yeah, I think Schiff's a fraud, a liar, a disgrace. He's an embarrassment to himself, the Congress, the country. Adam Schiff has been the lead hoaxer. He's been out there on television now for a year, looking in the face of you, America, and lying to every one of you in an effort to distract the entire country on a hoax Russia scandal. He is a fraud, and he should be called out as a fraud. He has been lying to everyone.
Exit question real fast. Speaking of probable cause, as you did a moment ago, was there, from what you saw in the application, probable cause to investigate Carter Page for connections to Russia?
Probable cause. There wasn't even reasonable suspicion. That document is a joke. The man's team was spied on for Zippo. They had nothing. And they better produce those redactions sooner. This is going to get a lot worse.
Yeah, it didn't take you long to read through the 400 pages because most everything is Sharpie, black.
It's about 5 pages when you get the redactions out.
Exactly. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
According to a brand new poll, President Trump's approval rating hitting an all-time high of 45% this month, powered by strong support from 88% of Republicans.
The poll also revealing the economy is the number one issue deciding their vote in the midterm elections this November.
Stuart Varney, the host of Varney and Company on the Fox Business Network, is here to weigh in right now. So, newsflash, it's the economy stupid, which we've said for eternity.
true. By the way,
Yes, sir.
next time, can I be on your panel of immigrants
I
who
don't make the
don't
decision,
like
Steve. That's
socialism?
Ainsley.
Because I'm a refugee from socialism, and I would have loved to have been on that panel, but that's another story entirely.
Well, what are, his approval ratings up even after after his meeting with Putin?
I think you can make the case that his approval ratings are up in large part because of the economy, which is booming. We are returning to prosperity, and also because the Democrats are just in love with socialism. And that doesn't fly with most voters. Real quick aside, if I may. When I left England in the 1970s, railroads, car companies, airlines, steel companies, coal production, electricity production, and a lot of road haulage, trucking, was run by and owned by the government and run into the ground. That was socialism, and I left it because the economy was just tanking. So I come to America, free market economy, giant country, opportunity all over the place, and away we go.
You never regretted it?
No, not for one moment.
Real quickly, ever since the president left Helsinki a week ago today, there's been so much negative publicity about how it all worked out, and yet
exactly.
Going up.
Now, this is a poll from the Wall Street Journal, NBC. It's a good poll, solid poll. It was taken during and right after the Putin summit, when there was that firestorm of criticism of the president. And yet, his approval rating goes up.
Why?
He's solid. Well, it's because of the economy, isn't it? That's the most important issue to most voters. And he's got the solid support of the Republican Party, 88% behind him. He's unified the party behind prosperity. The Democrats are in love with socialism, and up goes the president's approval rating, despite Putin. How about that?
How about that?
And this is a very big week, by the way. We'll find out this week for sure that we're growing at 4%. Historic.
Wow.
Big deal.
All right.
Later today, the Senate expected to vote on the confirmation of Secretary of Veterans Affairs nominee Robert Wilkie. The vote comes just days after Wilkie received near unanimous backing from the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. So, what else should we know about this nominee? Joining us now to discuss, Dan Caldwell of Concerned Veterans for America. Dan, thanks so much for getting up and being here with us. What should we know about Robert Wilkie?
Well, I think, first of all, President Trump made an excellent choice in selecting Robert Wilkie to be his next VA secretary. To quote Secretary Mattis, Robert Wilkie was born in khaki diapers. He grew up in a military family. His father was actually severely wounded during the invasion of Cambodia, so he has a personal stake in caring for our wounded warriors. He's also a veteran himself. He served in the Air Force and Navy, and he spent most of his life working in veterans and defense policy. So I can't think of a better choice for the next VA secretary, and I'm looking forward to him being confirmed.
Dan, you also haven't heard a lot from Dems talking about Robert Wilkie like they did Ronnie Jackson. Is that a sign to you that this is really going to breeze through the Senate with no problems, or are we going to have problems because the Democrats in the Senate always create problems for Trump nominees?
Well, I do think that Robert Wilkie is going to be easily confirmed, but I do think, unfortunately, he'll be the first VA secretary nominee to not receive a unanimous vote. And that's not a reflection of Robert Wilkie. That's because you're going to have people like Bernie Sanders who want to play political games around this. He's already said that he won't support Robert Wilkie. He voted against him in committee, not because he doesn't like Robert Wilkie, but because he's trying to make a political statement against President Trump, and that's really unfortunate.
If he is confirmed, what in your estimation does he need to do to turn the VA around?
Well, I think it's important to point out that over the last year and a half, President Trump has been able to pass a lot of laws that languished under the previous administration. Laws that fix the GI Bill, that increase choice for veterans, that make it easier to fire bad VA employees. But all these laws need to be properly implemented, and unfortunately the swamp at the VA is fighting back against them. So Robert Wilkie is going to need to get in there and ensure that all these great bills that President Trump has signed into law are properly implemented and executed, so the VA can better care for our veterans.
Dan, we will eagerly await the vote. Thanks so much for joining us, and we appreciate your perspective.
That sounds painful. Hope she's okay. Well, we have been telling you about the DOJ releasing more than 400 pages of the Carter Page Fisa warrant application, and our next guest says they confirm exactly what he's been saying for the past year.
Here to explain, Fox News contributor and former federal prosecutor. He knows his way around the courtroom, Andrew McCarthy. Andy, good morning to you.
Morning.
Morning.
What's your headline?
I think that a FISA warrant was issued on the basis of unverified, uncorroborated information.
How often does that happen?
You hope never, but one of the big problems that I think people are going to have with this is that there's a lot of things in national security where the government has to be able to look you in the eye and say, trust us. FISA is exactly that, because you never get disclosure of it. And what people are going to wonder is, if they did that in this case, how rampant is the problem? How much do they push the envelope because they know no one's ever going to check their work?
Right. Yeah, FBI, DOJ, they used that dirty dossier, as the president called it this weekend in a tweet, as a reason to say that Carter Page might be collaborating with Russia. That clearly didn't happen, and if it did, Carter Page would have been arrested, right?
Yeah, Ainsley, the other thing I mean, we should be blunt about this. They used it to say the Trump campaign was colluding with Russia. What they say in the application is that he was basically the linchpin for coordinating the efforts that Russia was making to interfere with the election with the Trump campaign. And it's probably important to point out to people that under American FISA law, to get a warrant on an American citizen, you have to show not only that he's willfully engaged in clandestine activities, but they probably violate federal criminal law. They were up on Carter Page for about a year. He's never been charged with anything, which again I think underscores that they did this based on the dossier without corroboration.
And the reason you need to do that is because, unlike a standard criminal procedure where there's a defense attorney who can represent the defendant, the nature of surveillance requires that these things be in secret, so the defendant doesn't get a robust defense like is the hallmark of the U.S. judicial system.
Yeah, Todd, this is the big problem with this. Because this is a secret proceeding, the Justice Department and the court owe an American citizen who's subject to a surveillance warrant a higher level of due process, because it's the only due process the person is ever going to get.
Right, sure.
They have to comply with the law on the Justice Department side, and the court has to be exacting to make sure that the Justice Department complies, and that appears to have broken down.
But with that in mind, Andy, this weekend you made some headlines that raised some eyebrows by saying we may need to look into the judges that were signing off on these FISA warrants. As we know, FISA judges are at the tippy top of their profession. These are federal judges with lifetime appointments who are asked to come on and take a look at these applications in very specific situations. That is a bold statement by you. You think this is warranted in this situation?
Well, I don't know how bold it is. Look, everybody gets stuff wrong, right? And I prefaced my remark about the judges by saying that I got this wrong. I told people that the FBI would never ever do this, that they'd never bring unverified information to a court, especially when their procedures say they can't.
Sure.
I analyzed it wrong. The judges obviously relied overly, it appears, on the FBI. They trusted that they were following their procedures and they weren't exacting enough. I wasn't saying that the judges should be kicked off the bench, but I think they ought to be asked hard questions. I mean, to me, I look at this application and it's appalling.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't understand how a judge would... I think if I gave this warrant when I was a prosecutor to a judge down the street in Manhattan, I'd have got my head cut off.
Andy, here are the 412 pages of the heavily redacted FISA warrant. And look at this. I mean, you can see...
waste of paper on those blacked out
I'm thinking maybe the court just weighed it instead of reading it.
It's heavy. There are 13 Republicans, including Devin Nunes and Congressman Trey Gowdy, who are asking for the unredacted version. They want to see what all these pages actually say. Will they get that?
They'll get more than we'll get. And that's probably right, because a lot of what's in these FISA applications, look, they should be classified because there's the very top secret information. If there's information in there about what we know about Russia and the threat it is to the United States, that stuff should be kept classified. So the people in Congress who have clearance to review this should review it. How much of it becomes public, I don't know. But if they're going to argue that those redactions have some corroboration that nobody, including apparently the top people in the FBI, know about, let's see what they got.
Well, so far, I mean, Congress has been having committee hearings for over the last year,
right.
And yet it wasn't Congress, a congressional request that got those. It was Judicial Watch, a Freedom of Information Act request. So they coughed it up for Judicial Watch. Why is Congress having so much trouble getting the stuff they want to see?
Well, the problem is Congress wrangles with the Justice Department, right? And neither one of them wants to pull the trigger constitutionally with their powers against the other one, whereas Judicial Watch, which is really dogged in these sort of things, they get to go to a federal judge. And a federal judge isn't so worried about that and doesn't have any hesitancy about telling the government to produce documents.
So I'm sure you've seen the many tweets the president has already tweeted out 4 times.
Yeah,
in the
I heard
last
about
hour.
him.
What do you think about his assessment of what was discovered in this FISA application and the renewals?
I would respectfully suggest that the president ought to let this sing for itself because it's really bad. On the other hand, the president's gotten pretty far without my advice, so maybe I ought to leave it at that.
All right.
Fascinating stuff.
All right, Andy. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You cannot mobilize the Iranian nation against Iran's security. You are making a mistake. You have clearly shown your opposition against the Iranian nation. Do not play with the lion's tail, or else you will regret it. It will bring you eternal regret.
Okay, so that is the president of Iran, Rouhani, talking to diplomats yesterday, where essentially he was laying down the law, don't threaten us, United States. And then the president of the United States, Donald Trump, he went on Twitter, and he doesn't do this very often. He was in all caps, which means he was yelling back at Iran, and he said this.
Right. This was his tweet to the Iranian president. Never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious! Exclamation point.
That's right. Also yesterday, Mike Pompeo was referring to the Iranian leaders, and he said essentially they operate like the mafia. You know, they're sowing discord throughout the Middle East. They're responsible for a lot of corruption and a lot of violence. Mike Pompeo told the audience at the Ronald Reagan Center out in California that the United States is with the protesters. Keep in mind, there's great unrest inside of Iran because of the sanctions and the fact that we pulled out, and since January, their monetary system has tanked. Whatever it was, if it was 100% in January, it's 50% right now.
And a large part of that is because of a 180 from one administration to another. Instead of coming at with pallets of cash to one from the Obama administration, obviously President Trump doing the exact 180 and saying, look, we're going to slap severe economic sanctions on you. They're going to put pressure on you to change your ways. There's a new sheriff in town, and that tweet, obviously in all caps, is one further piece of evidence that he is not messing around with this state sponsor of terror.
That's right. President Obama was giving him money, was supporting the Iran nuclear deal.
Right.
This new president, President Trump, has said absolutely not, and said at the beginning of the year he wants to withdraw from that.
Exactly right. One other thing that Mike Pompeo said was that the supreme leader of Iran had a $95 billion slush fund, a hedge fund that he uses to finance the Revolutionary Guard. Let's bring in from the White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. Sarah, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so what's going on with the president and Iran?
Look, the president's been clear from the beginning, since the first day he took office, and even before, that nuclear proliferation was something that he was not going to tolerate, something he would aggressively stand up and talk about. And he's certainly not going to listen to aggressive leaders from other countries and their empty threats against America. And he's going to stand up and make sure that we're protecting Americans and certainly protect the world from nuclear proliferation. It's something he takes seriously, and he's going to continue to be tough on this topic.
Sarah, what kind of a threat from Iran would allow our president to respond, and what kind of a response would that be?
Well, as you know, we're never going to broadcast what actions the president may or may not take, or what specific actions is going to prompt him to take things a step further. But you can be rest assured he takes this process extremely seriously. He's monitoring and watching the actions of Iran, and if needed, he will take what steps are necessary to protect people in this country, and certainly to protect the world from nuclear proliferation.
Sarah, we've been on the couch the entire morning, so we have not necessarily seen this because we're not watching other media. But you can be sure mainstream media is going to attack the president for his all-caps tweet saying he's inciting a problem with Iran. What's the president's response to that?
The only person that is inciting anything is Iran. The president has been very, very clear, again, since day one, what his objectives are, and he's certainly not going to tolerate the leader of Iran making threats against Americans, making threats against this country, making threats against Israel. This is a president who is going to stand up and make sure he is doing what is necessary. He's showing peace through strength, but if needed and steps are required, this president is not afraid to take them.
You know what, Sarah, this is somewhat reminiscent of last August when the president was going back and forth with Kim Jong-un, calling him Little Rocket Man, and Kim Jong-un was saying some derogatory things as well. But then eventually the president talked about fire and fury. You better look out, or fire and fury coming your way, which ultimately led to direct talks with Kim Jong-un. Is that part of the game? Is that part of the equation? Maybe this tough talk will lead to some sort of agreement?
Look, the president certainly uses tough language, but he's also not afraid to take tough steps if necessary. Thankfully, it didn't come to that with North Korea. Hopefully it doesn't come to that with Iran or anyone else. This is a president who wants to see peace. This is a president who wants to work with other world leaders. This is a president who wants to bring people together, but at the same time, he is going to do what is necessary to protect Americans and to make sure that he's laid that out very clearly. I don't think there's any question what Donald Trump's idea is here is that he's going to do whatever is necessary to protect Americans.
Sarah, let's talk about the Fisa warrant application. Congress has been asking for this. Republicans in Congress have been asking for the unredacted form. Well, Judicial Watch, through Freedom of Information Act, they got this, and it's 412 pages. If you start flipping through it, you can see all the redactions. Well, Congress sent a letter. You have 13 Republicans in Congress, led by Devin Nunes. Trey Gowdy was part of this, and they sent a letter on June 14th to the president saying, can you please get the unredacted FISA application? We want to see what it all says. And they have the ability to do that. We as Americans can't, but they have confidentiality status where they're able to look at it all. Do you think the president's going to get involved? Will he demand from the DOJ, look, you need to hand this over to Congress?
Look, the president wants transparency in this process. I think what you can see even just from the information that has been released is that the president's been right out all along, that this is a total waste of time and certainly a waste of taxpayer money. His campaign had nothing to do with Russia, but had everything to do with a great message to defeat Hillary Clinton. And that's exactly what that campaign was focused on, and that's exactly what this president has done since he got into office. And I think we'd all be a lot better off if we could get this out of the way, and that Congress and the special counsel could come to the same conclusion that the rest of America has, that this is a hoax and a waste of time, and let's move on and focus on some of the big problems and big challenges we actually have to face as a country.
Well, has he not asked for it because he just doesn't want to get involved?
Look, that remains to be seen, but the president would like this to operate independent of him, but he certainly has asked for the Department of Justice to be transparent in this process, and if there are questions, which clearly there remain to be some, we hope that they'll step up and help answer those questions.
I want to get to something that's right up my sleeve, because I'm the one that Fox and Friends sends out to do the stories on Made in America products. The White House is going to show off Made in America products at the White House today. This is a great thing that you guys do.
It's an incredible event. Hopefully the weather will get a little more cooperative throughout the day, because I know there's some big products that will be out on the South Lawn later this afternoon. But it's a great moment for our country. You get to see some of the greatest products that the world has to offer that are made right here in America. It's another reminder of the president's focus on American workers, the American economy, and creating American jobs. And this is going to be a great event and a great showcase. It's something we did last year, and we're really excited about seeing all the great products from all 50 states again here this year.
That's right. I just got an email from my friend Tim Tyler, who works for Viking Range. They build them down in Mississippi. They said they're going to have a Viking range there. Do you imagine the president's going to get a lot of feedback regarding the tariffs and trade talk?
Look, again, the president has been extremely focused on making sure we're doing everything to protect American workers and to grow American industry. And this event is exactly another reminder of that focus of the president. I don't think that will be the big topic of conversation. I think the fact that the economy is booming and growing like never before, that we have a better job market and job environment that we've had in decades, I think that'll certainly be something you hear talked a lot about. And maybe, just maybe, we could put that Viking range to you, Steve. I know you got a new cookbook. If you get some free time, maybe you can pop down here this afternoon and we can make some pie or some other
she loves making a pie. Out of your book. Pie.
I was going to say, Steve, that's a good contact to have. Can you give us all his number?
Okay.
Viking's a great company.
All right. Well, Sarah, good luck with the activity this afternoon. I hope the rain holds off.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks, you too. You bet. In a new op-ed, our next guest calls on President Trump to deliver a direct and unambiguous warning to Vladimir Putin following the summit last week. Daniel Hoffman writing, quote, this might be his last best chance to induce a change in Russia's behavior and unite the Congress and our nation in collective defense before the next Russian cyber onslaught. Daniel Hoffman served as CIA station chief in Moscow and is also a Fox News contributor. He joins us from our nation's capital. Daniel, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Okay, so first of all, you say that the president should warn Russia. Warn Russia what?
Well, first, I would just highlight that the president's director of Russia at the National Security Council, Fiona Hill, has rightly called Vladimir Putin the KGB operative in the Kremlin. It's important for us to remember that and the fact that Putin was director of Russia's notorious security police, the FSB, responsible for suppressing Russian citizens' freedoms and oppressing foreigners who work in Russia, like myself, for 5 years. The president needs to understand, I think, and I think he does, that we need concurrently to work with Russia on areas of mutual interest like arms control, but then counter and deter Russia from mounting their aggressive efforts to target our way of life. And so in this case, with Russia's election interference, I think the president would do well to warn Vladimir Putin directly that we know that Russia interfered in our election, that if they continue to do so, they will pay a price.
Right.
It's important for deterrence that the aggrieved party lets the other know that we're going to take action so that it's not ambiguous at all when we do take action.
Well, you know what, Daniel? It sounds like the president has invited Mr. Putin to the White House maybe middle of October. If at that point the Russians are still meddling in our election, and smart guys like you would know that that's going on, that would be a perfect time for the president to stand up and say, Vladimir, by the way, I told you a couple of months ago, stop it, you didn't, and now I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's an outstanding opportunity, very propitious opportunity to unite our country behind an aggressive policy defending our country from Russia's nefarious espionage. And we saw last week that our National Security Agency and Cyber Command are putting in plans to counter Russia in cyberspace with offensive cyber operations. I think there's no better time than a second summit for the president to deliver that very stark and direct, unambiguous warning to Putin. Now, he could do it before that, but why not do it here on our home turf as well?
Great point. All right, read all about it. Daniel Hoffman, thank you very much for joining us live from our nation's capital.
Thank you so much, Todd. Maxine Waters is sticking up for the demonstrators who burned and stomped on the American flag outside of her LA office. This was supposed to be a counter-protest against a far-right group, but that group never showed up. The California representative saying, in part, while I do not agree with torching the flag as a form of protest, I understand the Constitution guarantees everyone the right to do this form of free expression. Dan Dabano is a former Navy SEAL who fought for this country and has a message for her this morning, and he joins us now. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Ainsley.
Thanks for your service, and thank you for being with us. What is your message to Maxine Waters?
You know, the American flag represents hundreds of years of history, and there has been a tremendous amount of bloodshed in the name of that flag. It represents our way of life and our system. And while burning the flag is an acceptable form of protest under the law, it's something that my brothers and we find unacceptable and despicable.
Well, the protesters, they're chanting, this is not the U.S. flag, this is their flag. America was never great. What's your message to the protesters?
The protesters are attempting to soil the Republican Party and the president, and what they're really doing, in effect, is only soiling themselves. The flag represents all of our ideals, our way of life, our freedom. It represents their ability to protest that, but they're only bringing dishonor upon themselves by doing what they're doing.
Do you agree with Maxine Waters saying, do you understand the flag burning protest?
I do not. I don't think that the protesters are achieving anything, and instead of having a dialogue, what they're doing is they're acting like spoiled juvenile delinquents in doing something that only brings dishonor to themselves and does not further the dialogue. And really what this is a furtherance of what we've seen from the liberal Democratic Party. This is becoming the new center. Instead of having a dialogue and using persuasion, they don't really have a message, so they're resorting to tactics such as this to gain attention, but it only brings dishonor upon themselves.
Is this going to backfire?
I think it is going to backfire. You know, and you've seen what we're afraid of here is protest turning into violence. And it's not only is it a fear, it has been a reality. And this started last year when we saw Representative Steve Scalise shot by somebody who probably saw one of these leftists on TV saying it was okay to harass people. And that continued this year when you had mainstream politicians calling for harassment and inciting violence. And it wasn't just Maxine Waters. Right here in the tri-state area, we had Representative Tom Suozzi calling for use of the Second Amendment against the president in cases in which a disagreement could not be solved.
The guy who shot Steve Scalise, we don't know what his motivation was. I don't know if it was because, you know, people like Maxine Waters are standing up saying that we need to protest and we need to get in the faces of other people. We aren't sure what his motive was. But how did we get here as a country? Because you have men and women that fought for our flag, and we're allowed to disagree. Maxine is right by saying that you do have the right to protest. But how did we get here? Because it's so disheartening, the anger, the vitriol, the hate amongst people just because you don't like the president or you do like the president or you vote a certain way.
Somehow over the last couple of years, it's become acceptable to display sheer contempt and hatred for the other side. In times past, when there was a disagreement, that disagreement was expressed in elections or in opinion pieces, people having discussions, and we've gotten to the point where, and this rot starts at the head, I say, where we've had senior leadership of the Democratic Party saying to resist, to fight. This was a fairly elected president. He won the election. He represents America. He's our president, no matter whether you like him or not, and the left simply cannot seem to accept that.
Yeah, you're right, because we used to just go to the polls. That was your voice. You could vote a certain way. But now it's become protesting on the street, violence, going up to people in restaurants and telling them how they feel about their positions or not supporting this administration.
You have people suggesting harassment, and there's a very thin line between harassing by saying, I don't like your policies, and then getting into somebody's face and physically touching them or beating them, or as we saw last year with Representative Scalise.
And it's happening on both sides. Maxine Waters, she's fallen victim to this too.
It's happened to me. It's happened to me on Long Island twice in the last month or so. I've had people aggressively get in my face and my family. I'm running for Congress, and people don't like your ideas. Instead of having a dialogue and saying, hey, here's my alternative idea, they simply get in your face and attempt to intimidate. But I think most people are not going to be intimidated by that, and they see this for what it is, which is it's a desperate ploy, which is essentially going to backfire. And if you recall, back in the 60s, flag burning, for better or for worse, was seen more as a peaceful protest by hippies. My fear now going forward is that flag burning has become the radical left's alternative way to shout Allahu Akbar. It's not acceptable to most Americans. Again, and while it's legal, it's something we will endure, but we don't think it's the right thing to do.
All right. Dan DeBono, former Navy SEAL, candidate for Congress in New York's 3rd Congressional District, which is the North Shore of Long Island. We wish you all the best. And a little bit of Queens, too. Thanks so much.
Good morning to you. Back with some quick headlines. Democrats don't seem to be willing to give up the Russia collusion narrative. California Congressman Adam Schiff saying President Trump acts like someone, quote, compromised by Putin.
I certainly think he's acting like someone who's compromised, and it may very well be that he is compromised, or it may very well be that he believes that he's compromised, that the Russians have information on him.
Schiff's comments coming after the president's meeting with Putin in Helsinki. He urged Americans to vote Democrat to protect the country's values, but now fired FBI Director James Comey is taking aim at the latest Democratic movement, tweeting, quote, Democrats, please don't lose your minds and rush to the socialist left. This president and his Republican Party are counting on you to do exactly that. America's great middle wants sensible, balanced, ethical leadership. That's Look Your Headlines. Todd?
Right, Jillian, thank you. Democrats doubling down on their calls to abolish ICE and their attacks against the president's border policies.
I think the first thing we should do is deal with the children who are being separated from their families at the border. We should, I think we should get rid of ICE.
This administration's policy that literally ripped babies from the arms of their mothers and fathers. One of the darkest moments in our history.
But our next guest says for him the darkest days were when children were released to criminals during the Obama years, and officials like Biden did nothing to stop it. Former ICE supervisor and whistleblower Dr. Jason Piccolo joins us now to explain. Dr. Piccolo, thanks so much for being here. Explain what you mean by the darkest days were during the Obama administration.
Thanks for having me, Todd. The darkest days for me is in 2015, I was an ICE whistleblower. I worked for the Obama administration's White House Security Council's human smuggling cell. And I was the sole ICE representative responsible for anything to do with enforcement removal operations. I discovered that the Obama administration was releasing tender-age children. I mean, we're talking like little kids. We're not talking the MS-13 types, to criminal sponsors, unvetted criminal sponsors. Now, this was perhaps the most darkest times of my almost 20-year federal career.
Why doesn't the mainstream media seem to understand that while ICE, yes, does protect the citizens of the U.S., they also protect the illegal immigrants trying to cross our borders from things like rape, murder, human trafficking? Why isn't that clear to them?
It's not. They don't understand the ICE mission. Right now, the ICE mission it's twofold. You have enforcement removal operations and you have homeland security investigations. One completely deals with immigration, and one deals with your investigations of anything with an international nexus, i.e. your terrorisms, your counterproliferation operations, those types of operations. They just simply do not have the optics of what ICE does. Now, we have a whole separate agency that deals with stuff like that. It's called the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. Now, they deal with asylum claims, and they deal with helping out families that are here to claim asylum or refugee status. How come our politicians don't look at that agency as well?
As an expert in this, what do you think would happen if the Democrats, these specific Democrats on the liberal left, got their way and ICE was abolished? What would happen?
We would lose all enforcement capability. Now, think about what ICE does. Enforcement and removal operations goes out, tracks down the bad of the bad, the worst of the worst. Your killers, your sexual offenders, your rapists, they find them and they have them removed. Now, do we want to keep them within our borders, or do we want to just have open borders where anybody can come and go?
As somebody who's given so much of his life to ICE and defending our borders, when you see what the liberal left is doing right now, how does that make you feel? What's going through your head when you see that?
It sickens me. Now, I've worked with thousands and thousands of people throughout my career. I mean, through all the different agencies within Homeland Security, from U.S. Customs back in the day, through the Border Patrol, through ICE headquarters, through being a supervisor. Great people from every race, every creed, every religion you could imagine. Tons of vets, ton of Hispanics, a lot of really good people. Now, calling for their abolishment and for them to lose their livelihood, it just sickens me.
Put on your politics hat for a moment. I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you think that this is a smart strategy for Democrats on the whole to adopt what the liberal left is really doing, pandering to the soup du jour, the topic of the day here in abolishing ICE and open borders? Do you think this is a smart political strategy for them?
It's not. I typically stay as bipartisan as possible to have an informed decision, but this is not. We need solid immigration law. We need solid immigration enforcement. You cannot have open borders. I've seen so many very evil people come from other lands to spread evil within our country. I know that's kind of cliche, but it's the truth.
Dr. Piccolo, we appreciate you taking the time. As always, have a great day. Thanks so much for your insight.
Meanwhile, back at home, President Trump issuing a stern warning to Iran after Iranian President Hassan Rouhani reportedly told diplomats that Americans, quote, must understand that war with Iran is the mother of all wars. Trump replying with a tweet overnight saying, quote, to Iranian President Rouhani, never, ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. Let's bring in Fox News correspondent Doug McElway. He's at the White House for us this morning. Doug, what is the latest from the White House on that tweet?
Well, that tweet, which was unusually stern in its warning, even coming from this president, was the first thing that reporters wanted to hear about because it came late last night at 11:24 p.m. Sarah Sanders took a dig at the media when they asked her if the president wants war with Iran, and when asked if he consulted with his national security team before delivering that tweet, and asked if the Iran tweet was meant to divert from all the attention on Russian meddling. Here's what she had to say.
No, I think the president has the ability, unlike a lot of those in the media, to actually focus on more than one issue at a time. And certainly we know that the media is obsessed with speaking about all Russia all the time, but the president's focused on a lot of things that are taking place across the globe, and Iran is one of them.
Moments earlier on Fox and Friends, Sarah Sanders said that the president believes when it comes to Iran, all options remain on the table.
As you know, we're never going to broadcast what actions the president may or may not take, or what specific actions is going to prompt him to take things a step further. But you can be rest assured he takes this process extremely seriously. He's monitoring and watching the actions of Iran, and if needed, he will take what steps are necessary to protect people in this country and certainly to protect the world from nuclear proliferation.
As we all know, Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. Its hands, or its proxies, are playing key roles in many of the Middle East trouble spots, from support of Syrian dictator Assad, also in Iraq. It's playing a role with Hezbollah in Lebanon, in Yemen, in support of the Palestinian Authority, even in Venezuela, a major player in the cocaine trade emanating from Central America. Iran is also an ally of President Putin, so questions about whether the tweet was intended to divert attention away from Russian meddling seems to be misplaced. All that said, the president remains under fire, even from some in his own party, for Helsinki and the aftermath of Helsinki. Here's Senator Lindsey Graham on Face the Nation yesterday.
He's changed his mind 4 times this week. I'm glad that he's willing to walk things back and say he misspoke if it makes us stronger. I'd given anything if President Obama would have changed his mind when it came to withdrawing troops. He was told if you do this, it'll be a disaster. He did it anyway. President Trump at least is willing to change. But what I think he needs to do is lead this nation to make sure that the 2018 election is protected.
That said, Helsinki seems not to have damaged the president's popularity. In a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll, it rose to 45%, 1% up from June, the highest it's been. Back to you.
Doug McElway at the White House for us. Thank you.
President Trump now firing back at the president of Iran after a warning from Tehran that any conflict with his country would be, quote, the mother of all wars. Trump firing back, saying never threaten the U.S. again. This morning, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders backing up her boss when she said this.
The only person that is inciting anything is Iran. And he's certainly not going to tolerate the leader of Iran making threats against Americans, making threats against this country, making threats against Israel. This is a president who is going to stand up and make sure he is doing what is necessary. He's showing peace through strength. But if needed and steps are required, this president is not afraid to take them.
Team Fox coverage now. Fox News senior strategic analyst General Jack Keane is here to analyze, but we start with Greg Palcott with the news live in London. And what more did the president say, Greg?
Yeah, Bill, some tough talk from President Trump, reminiscent of some words that the White House has shared with other countries in the recent past. Let's give you the full verbatim of this tweet, which was sent out late Sunday night by the president. He said, and I'm quoting here, Iranian President Rouhani, never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. Yes, that apparently in response to comments that Rouhani had made on Sunday. He also accused the president of stoking an economic war and warned that his country could rev up uranium production for possible use in possible future nuclear weapons. Apparently tough talk on both sides, Bill.
Has there been any more Iranian action out of Tehran, Greg?
This is interesting. A pretty tame response so far from Iranian officials and analysts. Let's go through that. One analyst saying that these words are just the storm before the calm. State media calling it a passive reaction to Rouhani's comments. Another noted that the U.S. has talked toughly with North Korea, and then they made nice.
earlier this year. Of course, we have to remember that President Trump pulled the United States out of an international deal to prevent Tehran from getting a nuclear weapon, threatening tougher sanctions. Again, another Iranian official today, Bill, saying that a war of words could be expected. War of words coming from a couple of directions, Bill. Secretary of State Pompeo, in a speech in California yesterday, also slammed corrupt Iranian officials. Okay.
Thank you, Greg. Greg Palcount with the news from London. For more, here's Sandra now.
For more on this, let's bring in Fox News senior strategic analyst, retired four-star General Jack Keane joins us now. General, thanks for your time this morning. So you look at that tweet. What do you think? I mean, what are the consequences to which he refers? And who is that tweet aimed at? Rouhani himself or Iran as a whole?
Well, I think the Iranian leadership for sure. Listen, there's been tough language out of the Iranians for 38 years, since 1980. When they called us the Great Satan and death to all Americans. They've been on that theme for all of these years. What I do with the president's tweets, to be frank, Sandra, I really don't provide analysis of the tweets. What I do is I try to provide critical analysis of his policy decisions and what those implications are. And rarely does he tweet a policy decision. On occasion, he does. And that's what we have here. We have rhetoric, strong rhetoric to be sure. But let's take a look at his policies. He absolutely reset the table, Sandra, when he took over as President of the United States, from coddling Iran, which the previous administration had done. Iran tested this president within 3 weeks of the inauguration by firing a ballistic missile. The president immediately sanctioned for that and then called out any future aggressive and malign behavior in the region will be met also with a tough response. Last summer, he traveled to Riyadh, and with 55 leaders in the room, he told them, I stand shoulder to shoulder with you against our strategic enemy, the Iranians. And I know now that members of President Trump's national security team are working with the Sunni Arabs to try to put together something like an Arab NATO, which some of us have advocated for some time. And that would be a political and military alliance with the Sunni Arabs standing up against the Iranians. And of course, as Greg mentioned, just in May, the president pulled out of the nuclear deal, and the new sanctions are going to kick in 90 days and 180 days. And I know this administration is gearing up for some tough sanctions, just like they did with North Korea.
Well, we're all left wondering where this escalating war of words goes, because we know that this was President Trump reacting to Rouhani's words, and Rouhani was reacting to this scathing speech by Mike Pompeo yesterday in which he said this.
These hypocritical holy men have devised all kinds of crooked schemes to become some of the wealthiest men on earth while their people suffer. The level of corruption and wealth among Iranian leaders shows that Iran is run by something that resembles the mafia more than a government.
A comparison of Iranian leadership to the mafia.
Yeah. Pompeo's calling them out for the thugs that they truly are. I mean, as he mentioned, they've got a $95 billion slush fund that Khomeini has his fingers on, and that's what he's using with the Quds Force and Brigadier General Qasem Soleimani to push that aggressive malign behavior. That money's being applied in Syria. That money's being applied in Yemen to fester those civil wars and get the kind of outcomes that Iran has. And applaud the Secretary of State for calling them out on it.
What's driving all this right now, General?
It's Iran's desire to take over the Middle East, to dominate it. They've said it every single year since they became the Islamic Republic of Iran, to spread that revolution. They use a lot of their budget to do that. They've secured Lebanon. Their strategic anchor is Syria. They have undue political influence in Iraq. And they obviously started the civil war in Yemen with the idea of taking that country over. So that's what they're about. The United States, under this administration, is pushing back on that, and it's got the support of all the Sunni Arabs as well.
Clearly, by the president's tweets, his words overnight, he has put Iran and Rouhani on notice. What could happen next to escalate this even further?
The Iranians would have to do something. They'd have to take some kind of action. We're not going to take any unprovoked action on our own here. That's not what we do. But the Iranians, if they do something, this president certainly would react to it.
Like what? What would those consequences be that he's warning of?
Well, he would probably, if they did more ballistic missile testing, he would probably slap even more sanctions on them for doing that. I know they're trying to work a deal to reduce Iran's influence in Syria. I think that's going to be a tough one to get because it means so much to Iran. They've been fighting 6 years to get the influence they now have in Syria. And I think some people think Russia has more influence over them than what they really do. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges in the Middle East, and when you lift the cover off the challenge, you're usually going to find Iran there.
Lastly, I have to ask you about one of the president's latest tweets as of this morning. It's coming after the Iran tweet last night. He says, when you hear the fake news talking negatively about my meeting with President Putin and all that I gave up, remember, I gave up nothing. We merely talked about future benefits for both countries. Also, we got along very well, which is a good thing, except for the corrupt media. The president defending that meeting with Putin even as of this morning.
Well, first of all, we don't know what took place in the meeting for 2+ hours, and also the National Security Team was present for his meeting at lunch, so you put it all together, there was close to 4 hours of discussions that we're not privy to. This week, of course, Secretary Pompeo is going to provide some details on that to the Senate. I think it's on Wednesday, so we'll all pay some attention to that. I think the president's right. I mean, we didn't give up anything. We got tough policies against the Iranians. I think the toughest policies we've had since Reagan, to be frank about it. But I do think the press conference, in my judgment, was a lost opportunity in terms of us being able to be on an international stage with one of the world's #1 international tyrants and thug in Vladimir Putin, and being, not to humiliate him, but to be firm and to exercise some resolve that we're not going to continue to put up with his malign and aggressive behavior. And the condition for having a good relationship will be his changing that behavior. That, I think, was an opportunity we had to sort of plant that seed on a world stage.
General Jack Keane, great to have you on this morning. Thank you.
Another big story today. There was a lot of reaction in from President Trump and the Justice Department after the release of the details behind the heavily redacted Fisa application that led to the surveillance of a former Trump campaign aide by the name of Carter Page. All this happening during the campaign of 2016, remember. Here's the tweet from this morning. So now we find out that it was indeed the unverified and fake dirty dossier that was paid for by crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC that was knowingly and falsely submitted to Fisa and which was responsible for starting the totally conflicted and discredited Mueller witch hunt. Byron York, chief political correspondent, Washington Examiner, Fox News contributor. Byron, good Monday to you. Couple of pieces of sound I want you to listen to. Trey Gowdy on Fox News Sunday first. We'll get the Republican perspective, then the Democrats. First, Gowdy, watch.
Carter Page is more like Inspector Gadget than he is Jason Bourne or James Bond. Trump never met him. Trump never had a conversation with him. I'm sure he's been on the FBI's radar for a long time, well before 2016.
Well, you've read through the Fisa warrant, the application, what was not redacted anyway. So you're a Republican, like Trey Gowdy, let's say, and you conclude what based on what you have read, Byron?
Well, you would conclude that the Fisa warrant, as heavily blacked out as it is, basically confirms what was written in the Nunes memo in February, that memo released by the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, the big points of which were the FBI used the Steele dossier as an essential part of its application to get a wiretap warrant on Carter Page, and the FBI never explained to the court exactly where that dossier came from. That is, that it was financed by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. Those are your main points.
Okay, so that's the big driver in this, to get the judge to say yes at the Fisa court. Now, here's Adam Schiff from ABC on Sunday, not backing down at all. Have a listen to this.
I know those applications set out in some detail, a lot of which unfortunately is redacted, just why the FBI was so concerned that Carter Page might be acting as an agent of a foreign power. And let's remember, that application and those renewals have been vindicated in substantial part by Carter Page's own words.
Okay, so is he right? You're a Democrat and you believe the Fisa warrant, there's justification for spying on the Trump team based on what, Byron?
Well, the key words from Congressman Schiff were, unfortunately, is redacted, which is what you're hearing now from a lot of Democrats is that the really important stuff, the really good stuff that proves them right, that Carter Page should have been placed under surveillance, that stuff is blacked out. It is redacted. And indeed, if you look at this FISA warrant that's been released, there's page after page after page, and every single word is blacked out on it. So we don't know what's in there.
Okay, now, what would settle this matter if it is for some a political Rorschach test?
Well, that leads to an obvious solution, which is to release an unredacted version of this FISA application. Now, people say that it's highly classified, it has to remain so. I've talked to people and I said, look, how much could be opened up, unredacted, and how much would have to still be redacted to protect the methods of the intelligence community or particular sources? And the feeling is that most of it could probably be unredacted. And indeed, all 13 Republican members of the House Intelligence Committee, we're just finding out, wrote to President Trump last month saying, look, if you can't unredact the whole thing, here's about 20 pages that are really, really important. You could unredact those. So I think what we're going to go to in the future is, through some method, we're going to see more of this FISA warrant.
Very interesting. It's never been done before. In conclusion, without the dossier, do they get their surveillance of Carter Page? Is that door opened, or do we know that?
Well, the Nunes memo said that Andrew McCabe, the number 2 at the FBI, had said that without the dossier, they would not have applied for the memo and for the warrant. And if you do look at some of the material in the FISA application, that is Carter Page's history, and Russians tried to recruit him several years ago, and the FBI knew about that and talked to Carter Page. Well, you have all that information, but without something new, that is the allegations in the dossier, it seems unlikely they would have been able to get a warrant to spy on him in October of 2016.
It's thick stuff. Thanks for breaking it down and making it simple. Barbara New York there.
Thank you, Bill.
DC.
The people of Kansas were the tipping point for the future of this nation, and today they are again.
We say to Trump, instead of showing us your strength by tearing children from their families, where was your strength in standing up to Putin and Russia for undermining American democracy?
So that was the tag team seen over the weekend in Kansas City, Missouri, and also Wichita, Kansas. Congressional Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez out of New York, teaming up with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, campaigning in America's heartland, looking to unseat our next guest. Congressman Kevin Yoder, the Republican from west side of Kansas City. Sir, how are you? Good morning to you.
Good. Thanks for having me on the show.
What does the left see in your district that would have them out there trying to win?
Well, I think I've got a very suburban district. They see that as the battleground in 2018, and I really think it is. And this is where our strong economy and our focus on national security is going to really resonate with voters. We want this fight. We think the Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez wing of the Democratic Party, which is taking over, is not going to be a party that is going to appeal to middle-of-the-road voters.
So you think their message and their presence takes the party further to the left?
Yeah, it surely does. They're in the middle of a big primary right now, and they've got a lot of progressive voters in the Democratic Party. The center is open, and I think they're going to leave it behind, and we're going to capture a lot of those middle-of-the-road voters.
This is one of the big stories of the midterms coming up, right? Because you're in a district that you won by how many points?
11 points.
11 points the last time around. But Hillary Clinton won the district
by a point.
By 1 point. So Democrats see some vulnerabilities among these suburban voters, white women. You find it in Virginia, you find it in parts of California. Is it true in Kansas District 3, your district, that it is indeed vulnerable?
Well, I think it's certainly a swing district, and we have a lot of independent-minded voters who are willing to vote Democrat or Republican. That's why we work very hard at pitching to the center and making sure that we're focused on issues like economic prosperity. We've got a growing economy. Economy is very strong in this part of Kansas in particular. And we're focused on national security. You know, in Washington, we've invested in our national defense and focused on border security and keeping us safe. And we think peace and prosperity is that kind of message that appeals to middle-of-the-road voters.
Border security is a big one for you. You're pushing $5 billion for funding for greater border security, which could include the wall.
So I chair the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee, and my commitment to the American people is we're going to secure this border once and for all. To me, it's an embarrassment that the most powerful nation in the world can't secure its own borders. And so we're putting resources in to put more boots on the ground, investing in technology, and yes, barriers or walls where they're necessary. The bill we put forward that's going to go before committee this week has 200 miles of new barriers to stop the flow of human trafficking and drugs from coming into our country.
Are people in Kansas voting on that?
Well, I think that security is a very big issue in Kansas. Illegal immigration, drug cartels moving drugs into our country. It's a big issue when it comes to safety and security of the people in my district.
We found this Wall Street Journal over the weekend. They did a poll among Republican voters. 88% strongly or somewhat approve of the president's job performance right now. Do you see November as a referendum on what President Trump has done thus far?
Well, I think it's partly the administration, but it's partly also a referendum on where we are in the economy, where we are in our policies. Look, America is safer than it ever has been before, and our economy is stronger than it's been in decades. You know, the unemployment claims are as low as they've been since 1969. Unemployment at 4% or lower. These are kitchen table bread and butter issues. Wages are going up. Jobs are being created, and I think ultimately it'll be a referendum not only on the administration, but on the economy and the policies that are appealing to a lot of American people.
On that point, last point here in just about 20 seconds left, what are you hearing from your constituents about the president? We haven't been to your district yet, but what do they tell you?
I think I have a lot of constituents who think he's doing a great job. I have a lot of constituents who think he's doing an awful job. And there's a bunch in between who like the policies but don't like the style, the tweets and those sorts of things. And my commitment has been to represent the people of the 3rd District of Kansas, to put them first, and to do what's right. And in many ways that aligns with this pro-economic growth, pro-security policies of this administration.
We're going to give it a lot of analysis over the coming weeks.
All right.
Democrats need 24 seats to take the majority of the House.
They're not getting this one.
Well, when it comes to 2020, timing is everything for Democrats deciding whether to run for president as the party looks for the best candidate to boost their chances of taking back the White House. Joining us now is John Sununu, former New Hampshire governor and White House chief of staff under President George H.W. Bush. Are we already talking about this, Governor?
Well, a lot of folks are traveling around to a lot of places, but the Democratic Party's got some real problems before 2020. They have still the issue of their superdelegates. They've tweaked it, but that's liable to screw the whole process up again. The 3 major candidates, Biden, Warren, and Sanders, will all be in their mid-70s by 2020. And the socialist wing of the Democratic Party is catching all the headlines. So they're going to have problems not only in 2020 to try and create candidates with an attractive identity, but they may have serious problems in 2018.
It is shaping up to be really something to watch. Now, as far as the timing of announcing the runs, why is that so crucial?
Well, the only thing important is to visit New Hampshire, of course. But beyond that,
come on back.
But beyond that, it seems like they all feel they've got to announce earlier and earlier and earlier.
Yeah, why is that?
So you're going to well, it's just because the fundraising process now is so complicated and so demanding. They've got to go to Los Angeles and New York and Washington and Chicago and all these bastions of liberal Democrats to raise money. And then the first 2 primaries and caucus are in Iowa and New Hampshire, and that's a less socialist set of voters in those 2 states. So they've got to do something early about raising money and then reshape their image to suit the early primaries.
So who right now is the best candidate for the Democratic Party to win back the White House? Your perspective.
Right now it should be Mr. or Miss X, because all the candidates they have right now are really carrying burdens that I don't think would carry them to the White House. Biden, Warren, Sanders, all of them seem to have the age burden, the out of touch with the base of the party, which is drifting left, and frankly, the incapacity to find a coherent message. But right now, those seem to be the 3 most significant ones in the polls.
Well, the president says he'd like to face Joe Biden in 2020. Why do you think he thinks he has such a good chance at beating him?
Well, Joe Biden is a nice guy. Everybody in politics likes Joe Biden personally, but they all cringe when he starts his conversations publicly and the gaffes that he generates. And so Biden is a nice man, but not a good candidate.
Juan Williams has written an opinion piece talking about this very matter. And he goes on to write, if I could have it in front of me, Biden's white working class roots make him a strong messenger to ask Trump's voters the 2020 version of Ronald Reagan's famous question in 1980 as he challenged an incumbent president. Are they better off today than they were 4 years ago? Governor.
Yeah, but as the messenger of that message, Biden still carries the burden of having been Obama's vice president. And whether Democrats will admit it or not, a lot of the more moderate Democrats across the country are beginning to understand the disaster the last 8 years were, and I think Biden would carry that burden going into the primary process on the Democratic side.
Governor John Sununu, New Hampshire's got to be first stop, right? Good to have you on the program. Always good to have you here.
It's the way God intended, Sandra.
Yeah, we're coming to see you, Gov.
No, I've never been an agent of the foreign power by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I may have back in the G20 when they were getting ready to do that in St. Petersburg, I might have participated in a few meetings that a lot of people, including people from the Obama administration, were sitting on in Geneva, Paris, etc.
So that's Carter Page now, a former Trump campaign aide, denying that he was a Russian agent while saying he did do work as an informal advisor to the Kremlin. Now, those comments coming after the Department of Justice released new documents linked to his surveillance. This amid questions about whether or not the government relied too heavily on that unverified anti-Trump dossier funded by the DNC in order to spy on Carter Page. Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law Professor Emeritus, author of the book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. How are you, sir? And good day to you.
Good.
So you've seen a little bit of this FISA application. A lot of it's been redacted. What is your concern with it?
Well, I think there's enough in there for each side to claim support for its position. There is that footnote in which they do say that the Steele dossier was organized by people who were trying to get dirt on candidate one, which is President Trump. But there's a lot of material in there suggesting that they didn't make full disclosure about the circumstances under which the Steele dossier was authorized.
Right, and
also, they
if I can stop
gave
you there,
complete credibility.
It's my understanding the footnote never said the DNC. The footnote never said those who support Hillary Clinton. So it could have been a Republican candidate.
Sure. And I think there's not enough disclosure for us to make a firm determination. Look, I have no doubt that the FBI should have been more forthright in disclosing everything. And they did come to the conclusion that Steele had provided them legitimate information in the past. Well, we'd like to know about that. Was it legitimate? What were the sources of information? Under a Supreme Court decision called Franks versus Maryland, the court trusts the FBI to give it full information, particularly in the FISA context, where they're secret and there's no opportunity ever for history to make its claim. I'm glad this FISA application came out. I think more FISA applications in the future ought to come out. Maybe redacted, maybe they're redacted too much in this context, but the American public has the right to know how our privacy is being compromised in the name of national security.
Let me just go ahead and make two more points. We'll take them one by one. The first one was the footnote that you just mentioned. Number two was the Yahoo News article that was written by Michael Isikoff. Right. It's my understanding that he was briefed by those who did the dossier in the first place. So they were telling reporters what they found. They write up the article, and they present the FISA judges with the article as evidence to go ahead and surveil Carter Page. They've got a phrase for that, right?
But it's not. Right. It's not confirmation. It's really using the same thing. It's double dipping. And look, there's no question that the FISA court didn't know everything the FBI knew. The FBI withheld material from the FISA court. The question is, was that enough? The question is, was there other material that would have given the court authorization to issue the warrant? These are issues we don't know enough about because there's so much redaction. And this confirms my view that we should have had an independent, nonpartisan commission from the very beginning. Because right now we have Republican truth, Democrat truth, anti-Trump truth, Trump truth. And I think the American public is always entitled to have the full and complete truth through a nonpartisan commission. That's the way other countries handle this kind of issue instead of appointing special counsel.
Maybe you get to that at some point, but we're far past that point now. I think we can agree on that. The surveillance of Carter Page occurred in October of 2016. Sir, you're a few weeks away from the national election. Carter Page had been dismissed by the campaign several months prior. So why even look at him?
Well, look, there are a lot of people who are being looked at. Today, Manafort is going to trial. Would he ever been brought to trial if he didn't have a connection to Trump? Even the judge, Judge Ellis, who's going to preside over the trial, said essentially this trial is not about Manafort. This trial is about Trump. It's an attempt to squeeze him, perhaps make him sing, maybe even make him compose. And that's why the whole focus has been on, targeting people in this administration, and that's what has caused so many Americans to have distrust of the politicization of the process. Look, it's happened the other way as well, where Republicans have targeted Democrats, lock her up with Hillary Clinton. I don't like any of that. I wish we would just get at the truth and make sure we can prevent any kind of Russian influence on upcoming elections.
Clearly, just in 30 seconds I have left, you said there's enough for both sides in this. I think we've gone through 3 or 4 things that give you enough pause to be dubious on behalf of Republicans. Why do you think Adam Schiff, or what does Adam Schiff see in this application that gives him a strong argument for what he's been saying publicly?
Well, I don't think it's a strong argument, but it gives him a plausible argument. He says the footnote did indicate that there may be a bias, that there may be an effort to get dirt on the president a little bit, but not enough. I think both sides are overstating the significance of the disclosure. I'm glad the disclosure is out there because we, the American public, can decide for ourselves whether or not the FBI was fully forthright in providing the information to the Fisa court. My own opinion, no, they weren't forthright enough.
Sir, thank you. Come on back, okay? Alan Dershowitz with us today from Brooklyn, I think.
Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, sorry, my bad. It must be July. Thank you, sir. Talk to you real soon.